At approximately 5:30am on April 19th, 2026, at the 300 block of West 79th Street, Cedar Grove, Keisha Pugh and her 12-year-old daughter climbed through an open window onto the roof of a house. In a state of panic, they jumped all the way to the floor, breaking bones in the process. Just seconds later, neighbours could hear Keisha screaming into the phone that a man in that house had shot and killed 8 children. That man was Shamar Elkins, and 7 of those children were his own. To say that this case is disturbing just doesn't do it justice. I'll be honest, I cried when I read the details of this case. This is the tragic case of the Shreveport shootings. Welcome to Severed Soul. Today's case starts and ends at Cedar Grove in Shreveport, Louisiana. Shamar Elkins was born on New Year's Day, January 1st, 1995, right there in Cedar Grove. His mother, Annihilator Elkins, was just a teenager when she had him, and she was in no fit state to raise a child because she was deep in the grip of a crack cocaine addiction, and so she just couldn't do it. And little to nothing is known about his biological father. In fact, I can't find any information about his father whatsoever. Just another deadbeat dad who didn't have the bollocks for some real responsibility. So Mahilia just couldn't raise him, and that's a hell of a thing for a young child to navigate growing up, knowing that you were left behind by the person who brought you into the world. Now, the person who actually raised him, his mother growing up, was a family friend named Betty Walker. And Betty was simply a woman in the community who saw a child needing a home and stepped in to give it to him, so nothing but respect for Betty Walker. Betty became Shamar's foundation. She was the one who was there for the day-to-day, the mundane stuff, the discipline, the meals, the school years. You know, all the stuff that builds a person's character. And in no way, shape or form would I place any blame on Betty for the way Shamar turned out. I'd say being abandoned by his real mother and father definitely had an impact, but ultimately, you sink or swim, we make our own choices, and Shamar has to be held accountable for his own decisions. So, Shamar was born and raised in Cedar Grove by Betty Walker and his stepdad Marcus Jackson. And that was his community, his whole world really, and he never strayed too far from Cedar Grove. Even with Marcus in his life, Marcus was never that father figure who taught Shamar how to deal with adversity. He never taught him how to deal with conflict properly. When we look at Shamar's childhood growing up, we see a kid who learned to perform. And when I say that, what I really mean is, he learned that if he kept his head down, stayed away from the drama, and just acted like a normal kid, he wouldn't be rejected. Because of that rejection at birth, he could never face that feeling again. And I mean, I get it, being rejected by your own parents has to be the worst feeling in the world for a child. So he didn't have the luxury of acting out. If you see a kid from a proper, stable home, they learn that they can throw a fit, play up, be a bit naughty, and they know they'll still be safe, they're still loved. Sure, they might get a telling off, but their life doesn't change. And Shamar never felt like he had that safety net. He had to be the stable one. He learned that he had to be the guy who held it together. So you look at his childhood and you see a kid who became an expert at hiding. He wasn't a kid who was naturally calm. He was a kid who was terrified that if he ever lost control, the entire flimsy structure of his life would entirely collapse. And that very sentiment is crucial to the decisions he made later on in life. When Marcus turned 18 in 2013, he made a pivotal decision. He decided to join the National Guard, and he served for 7 years as a signal support systems specialist and a fire support specialist. Now, in these specific roles, we're talking about handling weapon systems, coordinating firepower, and functioning in high-pressure, high-stakes environments. And yet, he never actually deployed overseas, so he never really saw a second of combat. It's worth noting that at some point around this time, he did start to develop some kind of relationship with his biological mother, Mahilia. Now, I'm not sure to what extent. Obviously, he was a grown man by this point, serving in the military. So it's not like he needed her in the same way as when he was a child, but they were reacquainted in some capacity. When he walked away from the National Guard in August 2020, he was still a private, and that's literally the lowest rank he can have. And I don't mean any disrespect by saying that. I respect anyone who serves in the military. I obviously don't respect his later choices, but we'll come to that. So he leaves the military and he heads straight back to Cedar Grove with absolutely no documented support to help him make that leap back to civilian life. He was just left to fend for himself. And you hear that quite a lot with former soldiers, don't you? Especially here in the UK, it's like they just get used and discarded like dogs. Honestly, the amount of veterans over here that have ended up homeless is just disgusting. Eventually, he started working for the delivery firm UPS. And a guy named Willie Vasher, who worked with Shamar, told the New York Times he seemed like a regular, devoted family man. But Willie had clocked a specific detail about Shamar that just seemed a little bit strange. So, Shamar had this bald spot on his head. And it wasn't from genetics, it wasn't like hereditary or something. It was more like a nervous tic. Not like Tourette's, but similar. Strand by strand, Shamar would pull his hair out, all day long through every single shift. And it was just like a coping mechanism to deal with the stress. Shamar had at least 2 prior criminal convictions. The first was a charge for driving while under the influence in 2016, and then the second was in 2019 when he was arrested near Caddo Magnet High School after pulling a 9mm handgun from his waistband and firing 5 shots at a vehicle. Now, Shamar claimed the driver pointed a gun at him first. Even so, school children were playing outside less than 300 feet away from where those shots were fired. He pleaded guilty to illegal use of a weapon and received 18 months probation under Louisiana law, and that conviction legally barred him from possessing firearms until at least 2029. Why then was he able to later obtain both a small caliber handgun and a rifle-style pistol? Well, a 56-year-old Shreveport resident by the name of Charles Ford has been charged for supplying the weapons and faces up to 20 years in prison. And rightfully so, if you ask me. Christine Snow was a previous girlfriend of Shamar's, and they shared 3 children together. 11-year-old Soraya Snow, 7-year-old Kadarian Snow, and 5-year-old Braylon Snow. Shamar then went on to have 4 more children with Shaneiqua Pugh, who he would go on to marry, and they were 7-year-old Layla Pugh, 6-year-old Kayla Pugh, 5-year-old Shamar Elkins, and 3-year-old Jayla Elkins. Now, you might have noticed that some of those ages overlap, meaning that at some point during Shamar and Shaneiqua's marriage, Shamar was having an affair with Christine. So, you might be thinking, if Shaneiqua knew about the affair, which she obviously did, I mean, Christine gave birth to her youngest child after Shaneiqua had given birth to 2 of Shamar's children, why didn't she just leave him then? Well, Shaneiqua had in fact threatened to leave Shamar before they were married. So, what did he do? He told her that if she left him, he'd kill her and their kids. And, well, obviously she believed him because she stayed, and she married him in 2024. Strangely, Shamar's brother-in-law, Troy Brown, told CNN that Shaneiqua had found out that Shamar was cheating while they were married, and that's why she filed for divorce 2 years into the marriage. So, why didn't she just save herself the heartache of marrying him and just leave him beforehand if she was going to leave him anyway? Maybe she thought the cheating would stop once they were married. I don't know what goes through people's heads, but there are definitely a lot of questions to be answered. Tragically, it was that threat, which had been festering inside their relationship since before the wedding, that became the blueprint for what happened on that Sunday morning. According to a statement from Betty Walker to the New York Times, in February 2026, Shamar had attempted to take his own life and was admitted to hospital for mental health treatment shortly after. So, at this point, you'd presume that someone would be keeping a watchful eye over him, right? Well, not exactly, because he was given the all clear and he was released very shortly after. So, after the idiot selling him the guns and the psychiatric hospital sending him home early, I'd say that's 2 critical mistakes so far. Family members said that when Shamar came home, he seemed happy enough. But, as I'm sure we all know, a happy face doesn't always mean a happy mind. Just 10 days after he was given the all clear and released from hospital, he was on Facebook asking God to guard his mind and his emotions when negativity arose. And that post was public, visible to anyone reading his page. So clearly, he was very much still a man in crisis. On Easter Sunday, April 5th, Shamar called his mother, Mahalia, and his stepfather, Marcus Jackson. He was crying on the phone, and he told them Shaneiqua had filed for divorce and that there was a court hearing on the 20th of April. He then said that he was drowning in dark thoughts. His stepfather told him he could beat it if he just showed some resilience. And Shamar's response, to be honest, was just spine-chilling. He said, "Some people do not come back from their demons." Now surely, that line should have had some serious alarm bells ringing. And I know hindsight is a bitch and we can all say they should have seen it coming after the fact. But that is not something a sane-minded person says. On Sunday, April the 12th, Betty Walker invited Shamar and his entire family around to her house for dinner, and she said that he seemed completely fine. His mother texted him on Tuesday the 14th asking about the children, and Shamar simply replied that everyone was doing okay. And then on Thursday the 16th, she texted him again saying, "I love y'all. Give my grandson and my granddaughters a kiss from Grandma." But this time, Shamar never texted back. His brother-in-law, Troy Brown, who lived with him, heard him in those final days repeating the same thing over and over again. "Bro, I do not want to lose my wife." Troy described it as unlike anything he had ever heard from Elkins in all the years they'd known each other. But when Troy left for work at 9 p.m. on Saturday the 18th of April, he said Shamar seemed pretty calm, not at all like someone who was harbouring evil thoughts. And even Freddie Montgomery, who lives just across the street, saw Elkins sitting on his front porch that same Saturday afternoon, watching the children play in the yard, and he waved at Shamar, and Shamar waved back, just like they would any other day. That evening, Shamar went on a one-on-one dinner date with his eldest daughter, Soraya, and he even posted about it with laughing emojis. At approximately 5 a.m. on April 19th, Shamar Elkins arrived at Harrison Street where his girlfriend, Christine Snow, lived. Shamar shot Christine 9 times. Miraculously, she survived. Her injuries were described as life-threatening at the time, but she did survive. Unfortunately, her 3 children, Soraya, Kedarian and Braylon, were all taken from the home by Shamar, and he drove them to the 300 block of West 79th Street, Cedar Grove, which was less than quarter of a mile from Harrison Street. And that was the house where Shaneiqua Pugh lived. So Elkins entered the home, and as soon as he saw Shaneiqua, he opened fire, shooting her in the head. And then he moved through the house from room to room. And honestly, when I read what happened next, I cried. So I'm warning you, this is fucking sad. I'm really sorry for swearing, but it just is. So, most of the children were still asleep, and police spokesman Christopher Bordelon confirmed that Elkins shot most of the children in the head. The Shreveport police described them as execution-style murders. Some of the children woke up and tried to run. And can you imagine, as a child, waking up in your own bed to the sound of gunshots, to see your own dad holding the weapon? I mean, they probably thought he was there to save them, and then that bastard shot his own children. State Representative Tammy Phelps confirmed during a press conference that some of the children had attempted to escape through the back door. They knew this because there were visible bullet holes in that back door. Back inside the house, Shaneiqua's sister, Pugh, who was living there at the time, grabbed her 12-year-old daughter and got out through a roof window above the garage. They both jumped from the roof and Keisha suffered some broken bones, but her daughter escaped with scratches. Keisha managed to call 911 and could be heard screaming into the phone that Shamar had shot and killed his kids. Shamar killed his brother-in-law Troy Brown's son in that house that morning. Troy's daughter was the 12-year-old who came off the roof with the scratches, and it was his wife who fractured her bones from the fall. Brown said through tears, "I'm never going to throw the football with him again. These were 8 babies, precious babies, babies that I helped raise daily on a daily basis." At 6:15 a.m, police received information that Shamar Elkins had carjacked a red Kia, and at West 79th Street near Linwood, traffic units on patrol then observed the vehicle travelling southbound on Interstate 49. At 6:30 a.m, officers made contact with Shamar in the 400 block of Brampton Lane. It was here that they engaged in a shootout. At 7:03 a.m, Shamar Elkins was pronounced deceased at the scene on Brampton Lane. Betty Walker, the woman who had raised Shamar Elkins, received the call that broke the news. Betty broke down in floods of tears, saying, "My babies are all gone." As of now, no toxicology report has been filed to state whether or not Shamar was under the influence of any substances. All we know is that 8 innocent children have lost their lives in an incident that could have and should have been avoided. Honestly, I'm usually pretty good at separating my emotions, but reading the details of this story really hit hard, so if I sound flat, that's why. As always, I'd love to know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm just going to play a short clip now to remember those poor, innocent children. Thanks for watching Severed Soul.